Thank you. So, I'll give a brief overview of what I'll be talking about. We'll talk about the social problem of speciesism, the research purposes, the socio-historical context of the research question and objectives, some findings from the literature review, the methodology chosen, and a conclusion. So, the social problem that we are dealing with is speciesism, and that was defined by Kemmerer as the normative, systematic, institutionalized oppression of animals. Animals are deeply embedded in our society. They're used for food, entertainment, clothing, experimentation, companion animals, and therapy. I'm just going to stick with this for a moment. And so as they're really suspect to the whims of people, and as such can be victims of violence. So why is this issue important to us? It's important to us because it has implications for not just animals but people as well. So, speciesism has been identified as a social justice issue by moral philosophy. Empirical studies show us that the greater a person feels a species divide, the more likely they are to discriminate against other humans. Feminist intersectional analysis shows us that speciesism is included in an interlocking web of oppression. And fighting oppression in one area helps improve conditions for others. Literature on child abuse, domestic violence, and violence perpetrated on others shows us there's a link with animal abuse. So reshaping animal-human relations is good for the well-being of animals and humans. So what is it that we're trying to do in this research? Well, we want to broadly contribute to the reduction of speciesism and the concomitant reshaping of animal-human relations. Now, the first step to doing that may be raising awareness. So we want to explore the use of education and networking in raising the awareness of this issue amongst a select group, and that's social workers. Social workers are chosen specifically because they are likely to be responsive to issues of social justice. So what is the context that this research is taking place in? Well, social work has actually, interestingly enough, a history with animal welfare, dating back to the 19th century. And actually the Children's Aid Society in Toronto grew out of the Toronto Humane Society. So they were working together at one point. In the 20th century, some advances, of course, in our understanding of animals has really changed how we see animals. We know now that they are sentient beings with consciousness. Also, there's been changes in Canadian society in terms of their attitudes towards animals. Maclean's magazine pointed that out. And there's evidence of that. I mean, some indicators could be like in 2015, Quebec passed a law, the first in Canada, that recognized companion animals as sentient beings rather than property. And within academia, there's been a resurgence of interest in animals, including in social work. So that shows that this research is current, and because of the link with social justice and with the well-being of both animals and people, it's valuable. So what is the research question and what are the objectives? The question is, what happens to BC social workers' willingness to advocate for animals when action is taken to raise awareness of the social justice issue facing animals in society? The objectives are to develop a means of hearing from animals to get their voice so that we are led by their perspectives. The research is led by their perspectives. Developing an awareness-raising module, an education module to deliver to social workers. So develop it, deliver it, and then see what the impact is of it. And to explore the views of social workers about social justice in animals, and about the inclusion of this issue in social work education and policy. So, and we want to also be communicating these results to social work institutions and about the process as well. Now, the literature review was really very helpful. It yielded a theoretical framework, gave some way of understanding what happens to animals in society, how does this oppression happen. David Nyberg's theory of oppression is what seems to be most useful. So there are three factors that he identifies: competition for resources, unequal power, and ideological control. And so for what happens is the competition for resources might be land use, animals' bodies, that motivates the dominant group, humans in this case, to dominate animals. And so they do that through use of power in the form of maybe physical force, coercion, physical force, or political power. And generally, these arrangements that result from this are backed by the power of the state. Now, ideology, there is a whole system of values, beliefs, norms that exist or that are developed and continue to be dispersed widely to maintain the social arrangements that arise from the other two. And so this all sort of feeds each other. It keeps everything going the way that it's going, right? And so what I want to be doing is intervening in one of those areas, and its ideology is where I'm going to be focusing on. So how is that going to happen? Well, Elizabeth Cherry did some work with animal rights activists in 2 different countries, and she sort of conceptualized in a way that's helpful for me here. She talked about the symbolic boundaries between groups, derived this idea from ethnic studies. And so she was talking about the symbolic boundaries between animals and humans. And so what animal rights activists do is try to dismantle, disrupt this boundary. And some of the fundamental beliefs that maintain this boundary are things like that humans are superior to animals, and as such can do whatever they want to animals. So what I want to be doing is some of that boundary disruption, and doing that through education and networking. So the change that we hope will happen, and the way that it'll happen is, of course, through the disruption and the education, is that social workers that may be involved may find that the social arrangement between animals and humans, their relations, is now being seen as unjust. And that will manifest itself, if that happens, as changed intentions, a heightened awareness of a heightened willingness to advocate for animals. So the research, getting ahead of myself. The research is going to address 2 gaps. And one of those, this is also from the literature review, one of those is that there isn't, and there needs to be, more studies based on animal perspectives about animal-human relations. So we'll be dealing with that. The second is that there are social work scholars that have called for social work and are calling for social work to recognize this as a social justice issue, but there's been no empirical studies to explore this possibility. So this is going to be one. So the methodology that we've chosen is, I say we, I always think in terms of we, but it's I guess, right now, is participatory action research. And this aligns best with the research purposes, and its epistemological foundations, I guess, really are key features of the research. So it questions power relations, gives voice to marginalized groups, and the marginalized group that I'm see, of course, is animals, as well as actually the people that speak for animals. And Parr's view of social construction, the research being constructed by people interacting together, is going to be expanded to include animals as actors and as collaborators in this study. We don't know yet how that's going to be, but that's the intention. So a collaborative team, which is so central to Parr, is going to be choosing the methods. I don't know what the methods are yet. I'm just in the process of developing a team. And so they will be choosing a method, and they can choose, from a wide range of methods, qualitative or quantitative. So we've seen that we're going to be producing an education module, and we're going to be finding a way to introduce animals' voices, but we hope also that this will have the potential to change social work policy on animal-human relations and promote inclusion of animal issues in social work practice and education. And on a much more intangible level, hope that it contributes to a much more inclusive and peaceful world. Thank you.
I don't think I can get my mind around, and I think maybe you're still there too, what it looks like, what you mean by an animal perspective in your research. But the other worry, it occurs to me, is the anthropomorphism of animals. I mean, that's our history as human beings. I wonder if you would address that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think, of course, that happens. But what we know now about animals is that there's way more than what we knew before. And so some of that anthropomorphizing may not be off the mark because of how much more similar we are now, we know, than we were. There are differences, no question, as anywhere. But so that's one. And the other is the whole idea of getting animal perspective is really to be able to see what an animal wishes. And they have I have had lots of experience with animals and relations with animals. And they will very clearly tell you if they want something or not. So there are definitely ways, and there's a book that Will Kimlicka wrote that talked about the same issue and was talking about citizenship rights for animals. Can't even think about that, right? But he was talking about the same thing, that it's quite possible to get an animal's viewpoint on something, their wishes, through someone, a trusted individual, as we do for people that have, cognitive disabilities.
I just wonder about how your work kind of interfaces with animal protection institutions, the veterinary surgeons. I mean, people who have a, shall we say, a vested interest as much as anything else in animals, in representing a particular role and place for animals within the community at large.
Right. Well, this is really very a focused kind of study, and we're looking at social workers. We're not really looking at trying to talk with anybody else. The reason, again, being that social workers are more amenable to social justice issues, so we're going to look to see what happens. In terms of just general animal perspective, so what we need is something that tells us about animals and what they're thinking. And I guess right now, the model that I'm thinking about is the kind that's used with people that do have cognitive disabilities, have a trusted individual to talk with. So the other institutions, of course, they're around, and of course they're interested and will be part of, connecting with talking about what's happening, but it's not really involved in the study. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.